Hello, and welcome virtually to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Christopher Sands, and I'm very pleased to be bringing all of us together today for an update on the roadmap for a renewed U.S. Canada partnership. This roadmap was agreed to by Trudeau in their first virtual bilateral, all the things we're learning in the Zoom era, on February 23rd earlier this year. The two guests we have today are at the very heart of implementing that agenda, and that's why we've asked them to come to join us today for an update on how it's going. First, we have, coming to us from Ottawa and the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa, Ambassador Arnold Chacón, and from the Canadian Embassy here in Washington, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman. I'm going to ask each of them to open up. Perhaps you, Ambassador Chacón, first, with some comments about how the roadmap fits into Canada-US relations and where we give us some background and where we'll go from here. Ambassador Chacón.
Thank you, and good afternoon and bonjour from lovely Ottawa. I'm delighted to be with you here today and grateful to the Wilson Center's Canada Institute for the invitation to speak. I'm also honored to be sharing the screen today with Christopher Sands, one of the United States' foremost Canada experts, and with my friend, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman. I know I'm a new face for many of you. In fact, I've only been in Ottawa just over a month now, but I was honored, of course, when Secretary of State Blinken asked me to serve in Canada at such an exciting time, just a few months after launching the roadmap for a renewed U.S. Canada partnership. And I'm really pleased with the work we're doing together with our Canadian partners. I think most of you are already familiar with the roadmap, but for those of you who aren't, let me sum it up in a few words. It's a comprehensive plan for revitalizing the United States' relationship with Canada, our closest friend, partner, and ally. The roadmap touches on nearly every aspect of our bilateral relationship and our multilateral relationships too. And I'm very happy to report that in the 5 months since President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau released the roadmap, we're off to a great start. But to fully achieve the President and Prime Minister's vision and to deliver meaningful results for the people in both our countries and the rest of the world, we still have a lot of work to do. But importantly, we're going to be doing it together. Today, I'd like to say a few words, if I may, about the progress that we've made over the past 5 months to advance the roadmap, and then to look briefly forward about what lies ahead for our two countries. First, and I would say foremost, the roadmap underscores our efforts to work together to end the COVID-19 pandemic, to collaborate on the public health response, and to build resilience against future outbreaks. President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau have emphasized their strong support for the multilateral institutions that are on the front lines of the COVID-19 response, including the World Health Organization, which we have rejoined, and UN development agencies. And they also agreed on the urgency of getting vaccines distributed around the world as quickly as possible. And that's why the United States has committed to supporting global access to COVID-19 vaccines. We donated 80 million doses from our own supply during the month of June, including sharing 1 million doses with our Canadian friends to support their very impressive vaccination campaign. And that's on top of the 1.5 million doses we advanced to Canada earlier in the spring. We've also purchased 500 million doses for low and lower middle income countries, and we will deliver 200 million doses by the end of the year and 300 million during the first half of 2022. So more than 95% of the vaccines donated by the United States will be delivered through the International Vaccine Sharing Initiative, COVAX, to which we have also contributed some $2 billion. The roadmap also outlined our agreement to strengthen the U.S.-Canada Action Plan on opioids, recognizing a rise in drug use during the pandemic. And following the sobering news that nearly 93,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in 2020, it's clear that we have our work cut out for us. We've held meeting priority projects, and we plan to review our action. Excuse me. In recognition economies and supply chains, countries, services, and goods continue. And I can't overstate this achievement by science and public health crisis and restrictions and but I have no allow, we will move swiftly to order and manner. Pillar of the roadmap is with a shared vision for a sustained, inclusive economic that ensures people have good jobs both sides of the border. We now need to make sure that we live up to our commitments, not only in the roadmap, but States, as we know, as USMCA, because we want to champion an inclusive trade agenda that benefits and prioritizes the interests of workers and underserved communities. You have heard this directly from the US Trade Representative and her counterparts from Canada and Mexico, who a few weeks ago commemorated the 1-year anniversary of the USMCA entering into force. They met in Mexico City with a diverse group of small business owners and entrepreneurs to understand how the USMCA and trade affects their daily lives. And we want to make sure we're driving a robust economic delivery that delivers results. And I also want to highlight that here, all 3 trade ministers are women, and that's also an impressive achievement that we can all be proud of. Our trade envoys have also announced that they would hold the first ever USMCA Small and Medium Enterprise Dialogue this October, when our governments will engage directly with a diverse group of small business stakeholders to ensure that everyone is included in and can benefit from the agreement. And we demonstrated part of this work yesterday when our 3 governments hosted a webinar for small and medium businesses on the tools that they can use to increase their online international sales, particularly in North America. And to add to this work, the US Embassy and consulates in Canada launched an open grant competition last March for virtual programs to strengthen bilateral ties between the United States and Canada on women, economic development, entrepreneurship, and COVID-19. We're also hosting fireside chats with small business owners to share their experiences doing business between our 2 countries. And we plan to continue empowering and educating audiences to advance this work. As President Biden has said, there's nothing we cannot achieve when we commit ourselves to it, which leads me to the next theme in the roadmap, and that is accelerating climate ambitions. Combating the climate crisis, as we all know, is a top priority for both our countries. And the measure of our ambition and achievement will undoubtedly be linked to the measure of our cross-border collaboration. The United States has set an economy-wide target for 2030 to reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels. Special Presidential Envoy and former Secretary of State, John Kerry, and Canadian Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, lead the high-level climate dialogue that was launched in February. And the dialogue has 3 objectives for bilateral collaboration. The first is to increase climate ambition globally. The second, to innovate and deploy low and zero emissions technology and create jobs. And third, to enhance adaptation and resilience to climate impacts. An essential element in our transition to a net zero economy is the adoption of electric vehicles. That means that we're going to need raw materials for batteries such as cobalt and lithium. We will also need to establish in North America the necessary supply chains and build production facilities. But the good news is that we have the natural resources, the innovation ecosystem, and the talented people to achieve these objectives, all right here in North America. The U.S. Department of Commerce has organized webinars on critical minerals to connect industries and raise awareness about emerging technologies and opportunities for trade and investment on both sides of our border. And in addition, the U.S. Canada Critical Minerals Working Group will meet next week on July 28th. Our two governments must align on priorities and policies on critical minerals to spur research, development, and innovation necessary to make North America competitive and secure in this pivotal sector. An important element in this work is outreach to our stakeholders, because it's the only way to know if our policies are working and who and how they affect. And we must also consult with Indigenous peoples, subnational governments, workers, civil society, youth, business, and industry in both the United States and Canada. So expanding our stakeholder outreach also advances diversity and inclusion, which is so important to both of our countries. We can't be credible advocates for democracy and human rights abroad if we aren't demonstrating our commitment to them at home. And that's why the United States is prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as a national security imperative. We are ensuring that underrepresented groups, including women, have a path to economic recovery. We can't grow, advance, and lead if significant parts of our people are left out. Our diversity also gives us an important competitive advantage on the world stage, to say the least. And speaking of the world stage, while history has made us allies, our future together necessitates strengthening our alliance as traditional threats evolve and non-traditional ones emerge. So we're enhancing our already close working relationship on counterterrorism, with a greater focus on countering domestic violent extremism, or as our Canadian colleagues call it, ideologically motivated violent extremism. So priority areas include further cooperation within the online space, information sharing on strategies and threats, and exchanging views on legal frameworks and respective prescription and sanctions regimes. The US and Canada benefit from a highly integrated partnership also on defense and security. Americans and Canadians work together in defense of North America through the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known to all of us as NORAD. And after more than 60 years, NORAD remains the world's only binational military command. And we're also two of the original NATO allies, and our participation in the alliance demonstrates the strength of the transatlantic bond. But of course, we can't afford to remain complacent. Collective security is a shared responsibility, and we must invest in modern, ready, and capable forces in line with commitments that we've made to NATO under the 2014 Wales Summit Defense Investment Pledge. Similarly, NORAD forms a critical piece of our continental defense and must be modernized to meet evolving global security challenges. So as we work to reboot our economies, defense spending offers an opportunity to invigorate key innovation sectors. NORAD modernization stands to benefit, for instance, from Canada's exceptional artificial intelligence and machine learning sectors, as well as the technological agility of US and Canadian businesses, including those small and medium businesses I mentioned earlier. And at the same time, it not only supports post-pandemic economic recovery, but also enhances national resilience, also in line with our NATO responsibilities. So we welcome the Canadian government's initial contributions to NORAD modernization and some allocations for NATO operations in budget 2021, but there is more work to be done. And this leads me to my final point, and that is that we must strengthen our alliances across the world. President Biden directed all of us in the US government from the moment of his inauguration to repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. And we prioritized that repair process in February when the president made a virtual visit to Canada just 1 month after taking office, and again in June when he traveled to Europe to attend the G7 and NATO summits. We're committed to being a leader and collaborator in the global community because we recognize that the biggest threats we face must be met with collective action. We have to demonstrate that engaging in the world isn't just a nice thing to do. Rather, it's firmly in our self-interest and essential to North American peace, security, and prosperity. We, of course, are strongest when we work on global problems together. So the United States and Canada have taken leading roles in challenges in the Western Hemisphere in particular. And at the latest iteration of the Venezuela Donors Conference hosted by Canada, the United States was proud to contribute $407 million to the nearly $1.5 billion committed from partners to support humanitarian assistance for the Venezuelan people. On Nicaragua, we joined with Canada to issue sanctions targeting individuals associated with the oppressive Ortega regime. And without a doubt, Russia remains determined to enhance its global influence and play a disruptive role on the world stage. And Canada and the United States have made every effort to have a cooperative relationship with Russia when our interests align, but we will not hesitate to act when Russia threatens our interests. The People's Republic of China is the only competitor, in our view, potentially capable of combining its economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to mount a sustained challenge to a stable and open international system. I think Secretary Blinken has said it best when he noted that our relationship with China will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. And we will engage China from a position of strength in collaboration with our allies and partners by standing up for our values in international organizations and investing in our domestic economy. And let me also say that, again, we join Canada in calling for the immediate release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And we continue to condemn their lack of minimum procedural protections during more than 2.5 years of arbitrary detention. As many senior leaders have said in my government, we are treating the cases of the two Michaels as if though they were our own. So I will conclude now, and I just like to revive one of my favorite quotes, a lesser cited quote from President John F. Kennedy, his famous speech to the Canadian Parliament in 1961, when he said, "Our alliance is born not of fear, but of hope." And so I think it's the kind of hope that is inspired and by shared values like freedom, democracy, and human rights. And it's the kind of hope that gives me confidence that despite all of the daunting challenges that we face, the future of U.S.-Canada relations, of our national security, and of our alliances is bright. Thanks, Christopher. Sorry for going on so long.
Not at all, Ambassador. Thank you very much. And that's pretty good for 1 month on the job. Gosh.
I have a super team, let me tell you, I'm very proud of them.
Excellent. I know some of them, and I think that's right. Ambassador Hillman, let me turn to you now for your perspective on this and for the Canadian outlook on the roadmap and where we're headed.
Thanks very much, Christopher. And thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. And hello to my friend, Ambassador Chacon. It's great to see you on the screen. So I'm really happy to join you. I will try and go over some of this in a way. I think the ambassador has covered a lot of really important elements of the roadmap and some of the things that we're doing together. And so I'll try and add some different elements there. I think I'd like to start with talking a little bit about what this document is, because I don't know how many of your participants in this session are familiar with traditional leader statements or joint statements that come out of meetings that leaders have, whether bilaterally in groups. But for those of you, who are looking into this kind of thing on a regular basis, you'll know that generally speaking, they are short. 1 page, maybe, if you're, maybe less, maybe 2 pages is pretty rare. They are largely high level, where leaders express their, issues of values or areas where they have common ground or aspirational goals. If you are, if you're lucky, you might get 1 or 2 concrete initiatives that are launched, or taskings to their cabinet members, or some kind of concrete project that is announced in one of these, and that's great, right? But that's usually what you can expect in a bilateral leader statement. This is something really different. This is not a statement. This is a work plan. And it was designed to be a work plan, and it was put together. In fact, in a lot of the discussions that we had as we were putting it together, it was designed to put on the table as many concrete projects together that we could, that we felt were important and at the highest importance. Of course, the document also, and in the work plan that it articulates, it underlines shared Canada-US priorities. It underlines shared US-Canada values. It underlines, frankly, the moment in time in which we find ourselves, combating COVID, issues around racial equity and equality and diversity, issues around climate, obviously. So it is geared to this moment in time. It is geared to our partnership, and it is meant to be also forward-looking. So how do we as partners come up with very concrete projects that can address the challenges that the 2 countries are facing right now, that can create a vision for how we can work together to address future challenges, but to make each other stronger and to support each other? And how do we ensure accountability for how do the leaders in issuing this roadmap ensure accountability for these projects that are put forward? And so, just for your information, a bit of an insider information for you is that there's actually a process behind this roadmap, which is a sort of a matrix where we try to keep up with every item that's in there. And there are, by my calculation, almost 24 concrete action items. What are we doing? How are we doing it? What's the next milestone? Somebody said to me as we were working on this, that President Biden does not have meetings that aren't working meetings. He doesn't, want to do things that aren't designed to achieve something. And Prime Minister Trudeau is 100% the same way. So it's a terrific, I mean, not to overplay it, but it is a really, well, it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. I have actually never participated in the creation of something like this before. And there may be other things out here like it, but I'm not familiar with any. I will quote to you, because I think that this, just to take a step back and to express what the vision of it is, I will quote to you something that the leaders said in issuing the roadmap. They said that the goal, these are my glasses. They said that the goal of the roadmap is to revitalize and expand the historic Canada-US alliance and steadfast friendship, to overcome the daunting challenges of today and to realize the full potential of the relationship in the future. That's the philosophy of the roadmap. And they also said that Canada and the US, our partnership is strong and it endures because we invest in each other's success. That is also meant to be a thread that goes through all of the elements that we find in the roadmap. So now we're in the implementation phase. It is a whole government on both sides, because down here in Washington, I obviously work with the agencies of the US government that are the counterparts to the Canadian departments implementing this. And we are in the implementation phase. Whole of government ministries, their agencies, different actors within our 2 governments are, moving forward, and they're accountable for the things that have been set up for them. the only other thing I would mention, I do think this is important, as wonderful and as important as this roadmap is, and how it's structuring a lot of the conversations that we're having bilaterally. I think it's also important never to lose sight of the fact, and those of you who heard me talk before will know I say this all the time, but in addition to every single thing that's on that piece of paper, and there are many, the actual strength of the Canada-US relationship is derived from the hundreds of thousands or millions of interactions that Canadians and Americans are having every day. Businesses, families, academics, scientists, think tanks, obviously our elected officials at the state and the local and the municipal level. I mean, just everybody. And I know that the COVID times have limited some of the the face-to-face interactions that we've been so used to over time, but I can guarantee you it hasn't actually limited the degree to which we are working together all the time. So there's everything in the roadmap, and frankly, there's just a whole bunch else. So look, Chris, I know we want to have a conversation. I am going to take just a minute though to talk about touch on a few items under each of the 6 pillars that I think are worthwhile. So there's 6 pillars, right? Combating COVID, economic recovery, climate, advancing diversity and inclusion, bolstering our security and defense relationship, and then working internationally with other partners. On combating COVID, not surprisingly, combating COVID and then dealing with the economic challenges of having to have lived through COVID are the 2 priorities of our governments, probably most governments around the world, and there's an awful lot of emphasis being put on that. We have been working with the U.S. throughout in the science, in the world of innovation and science, in the world of PPE production, in the world of supply chain resiliency in some of these areas, and more recently, of course, in doing our best to support vaccination of our populations. And the ambassador mentioned the U.S. Loaned or privileged the delivery to Canada of 2.5 million vaccine doses, 1 million Moderna, 1.5 million AstraZeneca earlier this year. That was very useful and important at a critical time when we're working very hard to get some of our vulnerable Canadians vaccinated, and we are deeply grateful for that. We are also, working with U.S. manufacturers and have been throughout this pandemic. And the good news is, as of today in Canada, we have over 80% of Canadians that have 1 dose, and over 60% have received 2 doses, and that is a wonderful thing. And we've even higher, rates for our elderly populations and our First Nations, Inuit, and Northern communities that can be particularly vulnerable given the challenges of long distances and healthcare availability in those regions. So we're very pleased with that, and we're very pleased with our partnership with the Americans on this, and frankly, American industry. We've had many of our colleagues have gotten to know a lot of U.S. manufacturers very, very well over the past year and a half, and those are relationships I think that are really going to be useful to us as we think through resiliency for our nation going forward. But of course, vaccinating our own populations is not the end of it. This is a global phenomenon, and we have a joint commitment to work to eradicate COVID around the world, and Canada is making its contribution to that. We have an initial commitment of 13 million doses to COVAX earlier this year, and just very recently, the government of Canada announced that it will donate another 17.7 million doses. We are also launching a program to match dollar for dollar, the federal government to match dollar for dollar donations that Canadians make, individual Canadians make to UNICEF towards COVID-19 vaccination fundraising, up to a maximum of $10 million. So we're really trying to, make sure that Canadians also realize that as we start to feel better about the situation that we're in domestically, this is a global issue, and we need to play our part on the global stage to bring this pandemic to a better place. We are also working hard to revitalize our pandemic preparedness in North America. And we do have systems in place, but obviously we have a lot of lessons to learn given what we've been through. The ambassador did mention opioids, and I do think that's really important. I will just reemphasize that for a moment. People may not think that much about this, but sadly, Canada and the US are, the last time I checked, the leading countries for opioid deaths in the world, and it is very much a problem that we have to be grappling together. It's very much a priority for both of our governments, and we have seen a real surge in these challenges during the opioid epidemic, as well as other social challenges for our citizens. So we have a group that has been active on opioid, the opioid crisis for quite a few years, but they are invigorating some of their information sharing, in particular around trying to understand what is happening right now, what more we can do with respect to not only understanding this crisis, but stopping the importation of these drugs, assessing and assuring the health of our citizens. So there's a lot of really great activity happening there. Moving to the economic side, there's an awful lot to talk about there, and I'm happy to go into any of that people are interested in. I think that from our perspective, some of the core priorities at this moment in time have to be reinvesting in Canada-US supply chains. If there's something that we have learned during the COVID pandemic, it's that we need resilience. We need partners that we can count on when the chips are down. We need to know that we are going to be able to keep those supply chains running. And I believe that we did a very good job under very difficult circumstances. We kept our land border open. We kept those supply chains running. We did, of course, have a certain diminishment in our bilateral goods trade that flows, but it wasn't much. It was less than 15%. And given the turmoil of the past year, I think that's quite impressive, and I think it speaks to the deep integration of our supply chains. But now is the moment to recognize that and double down on it, to make sure that we have the systems and the rules and the understandings in place to help those. Because let's face it, those are Canadians and Americans, those are companies, those are people, to help those people supercharge their relationship, kind of get back together. Like, we're all looking forward to getting back together with our family and friends. We've got to encourage our businesses to reinvigorate the strength of their relationship. So for me personally, in all of the Build Back Better space, that's a huge priority. And I think that we're making some very good headway. There is, of course, within that effort, specific areas that are particularly forward-looking. So critical minerals and what that brings, and what we've learned about our vulnerabilities, perhaps, of not having a sufficient diversity of supply in critical minerals, and what Canada can bring to the table on that as a country that has many of these minerals within our territory. Those are super exciting conversations. And those products it's about facilitating increased competitiveness for all of us, Canada-US, and in our partnership, for a lot of the technologies that we are looking towards for a greener economy, for electrification of vehicles, but also for security and defense purposes, because a lot of the technologies are essential in some of our security applications. So that's really, I think, a really interesting place to look. But also, and maybe a good transition into the climate change agenda, also our supply chains and mutual supportiveness in all of the technologies that are not only good for combating climate change and necessary to combat climate change, but are actually emerging technologies and products that the world is going to want, and that we can, if we do this well and together in a way, as the leaders said, that sort of buttress each other's potential, that we can find ourselves in Canada, the US, or in North America as leaders in some of these technologies. We have a lot of innovation going on in Canada. You have a lot of innovation going on in the United States. We have the workers, we have the know-how, we have the materials, we have the, you know, the everything from the intellectual property to the manufacturing capacity, to the will to really push ourselves forward in these areas. And that's really exciting. And I'm looking carefully at how to make sure we support that. On the climate front, so there's all that aspect. I think that we're very focused on domestically trying to lead and trying to be countries that lead with each other and lead on the world stage. And one of the things that is very true when you think about Canada-US relations, it's quite different than, in my experience living it here in Washington, it's quite different than the relations that, say, some of my fellow ambassadors have when they're dealing with the US administration. Because a lot of what we talk about is actually domestic oriented, because it's about our roads and our bridges and our border and our shared environment, our shared waterways, our shared air. It's about migratory species. It's about sort of policing and shared policing. We do an awful lot of work together in the security space. It's about these very vibrant transborder economic relationships, cultural relationships, some shared history. So it's a very a lot of it has a lot to do with things that are deeply of domestic concern. We have, you know, I think 12 or more binational unions. So we think about workers and we think about how workers are faring these days. A lot of it is shared between Canada and the United States, some of our concerns. So I say that because when we think about the climate file, there is all the work we're doing on the world stage together, but there's also a lot of work that we're doing to try to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, we support each other in setting our goals and ambitions, so that we are, one, you know, encouraging each other to do as much as possible, but two, not hindering some of the interesting development that's going to come through transitioning to a much greener place. So for example, Canada has announced just late in June that we are going to set a mandatory target for new light duty cars and passenger trucks in Canada to be zero emissions by 2035. So that is accelerating our goal of the electrification of vehicles. And we also said we will pursue the regulations that are required for that. And I think that has launched some pretty interesting conversations around Canada-US collaboration and setting targets of this nature. We have said that we will align with the most ambitious goals that are set here in the US, depending on where they're set, and they're set generally at the state level, so we're watching that carefully. We are going to try to use that to motivate a broader global shift, which is good for the environment, but it's good for our industry, and it's good for our innovators as well. We have, and I've gone off my notes, so there's probably lots of interesting things that I can tell you. We have a high-level ministerial dialogue on climate that is working, as I say, very much to look at some of these regulatory alignments that can be mutually reinforcing. Our energy secretary, our energy minister, and energy secretary Granholm, so Seamus O'Regan and Secretary Granholm, have a new memorandum of understanding on energy cooperation, which is also very centered on clean energy, centered on workers in that sector, and trying to enhance as many opportunities as possible that are good for workers in that space as well. And as I say, we're also trying to take these deep alignments and bring them out internationally. I will try to move a little more quickly. There's a ton of work that's being done on diversity and inclusion, both in the international stage and kind of just sharing experiences. We all have our challenges. They're in some respects similar, in some respects different between our two countries. So there's a lot of interesting and I think very important conversations being done on these terribly important issues, also on the world stage. So we're We are implementing our feminist international assistance agenda internationally. Vice President Harris, who represented the U.S. at the Generation Equality Forum, also spoke to many of the same kinds of things that our government is speaking to. So we are working on that very well together. And the other area where I think that relates sort of to economic pandemic, but also diversity inclusion, is a very clear, and the data shows it, recognition that the pandemic has been particularly hard on women in Canada and the United States, particularly hard on racialized groups, particularly hard on those who have the most precarious employment. And again, back to the theme of what have we learned these past year and a half? How have we had similar differences experiences, and how can we make sure that we as public policymakers put in place rules that are going to make things better? And there's a lot of very interesting conversations happening on that. Our government, in April, we released our budget, and we introduced a number of measures to address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the most vulnerable members of our population. Ambassador Chacon spoke a lot about the security and defense space. I don't think I will add much there. The only thing I would like to say is a recent example of, I think, some very good work that we do together up in the Arctic is the joint patrolling that we're doing, and some really important scientific work that we're doing together in this season. A lot of that work, of course, has to happen in the warmer seasons. So we have the HMSC Harry DeWolf, which is operating with the U.S. Coast Guard later this summer in the waters north of Alaska. These activities are very important for building our common understanding of that space, some of the needs and some of the challenges that we're facing. And finally, in terms of global alliances, President Biden and his team are working closely with allies in all fora, and we are very welcoming of that, and it is very important. We are, from the WTO to the UN to the G7 to the G20 to NATO, there's an awful lot going on, and we welcome the U.S. leadership in all of these forums. And I think that it's going to be essential, because our world is facing a lot of multifaceted, complex problems, not just COVID, but that's going to be with us for a while. But as we all know, there are a lot of important challenges all over the world right now. And frankly, the only way that countries of like mind and values are going to be able to address them is working together. So I will stop there and let you, Chris, take over and back to us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I don't really want to take over. This has been really a wonderful chance to hear from you how things are going. And I have a bunch of questions, but before I ask any, I just want to remind our viewers, if you're viewing this live, you can send us a question one of two ways. Either send us an email at canada@wilsoncenter.org. And because we're American, we spell center the American way, so ER, not RE, just in case. Or you can send us a tweet, send us a direct tweet at Canada Institute. That's our Twitter handle. All right, while we're waiting for those questions to come in, let me just start with one or two of my own. The first one is, I want to ask both of you. So in March of 2020, as we know, the two countries agreed to restrict non-essential crossing of the border to slow the spread of COVID-19. And the Wilson Center, as you may know, has organized a task force on public health on the U.S.-Canadian border, and we've been following the developments of the border really very closely. The roadmap says both leaders agreed to take a coordinated approach based on science and public health criteria when considering measures to ease Canada-U.S. border restrictions in the future. This week, Canada announced that it was going to begin admitting vaccinated Americans on August 9th, and on Wednesday, the United States said that it was extending restrictions through August 21st. So my question is this a coordinated move? Because it looks a little like Canada is ahead of the US here. Maybe I'll turn this to Ambassador Hillman first, and then give Ambassador Chacon a chance to answer the question.
Thanks for that. And I'm very happy to answer that question, because I've been here in this spot since that border closure back last March. And I can tell you that from that day to this week, we have, if not weekly, sometimes several times a week, conversations at various levels with DHS, with the State Department, sometimes with the White House, just depending on the topic, around the Canada-U.S. border. And these conversations have been with the objective of sharing information. Well, first setting our objectives, right? Why were we doing this? The reason that we did it was to limit travel so that we could try and get our domestic house in order, but to allow trade to continue to flow. And as I said, I think we've been extremely successful in that regard. And so we have continued to talk, to share information on the progress of the pandemic, our efforts to contain it, concerns that we're having with respect to the epidemiological situation in both of our countries, and then the border, administrative matters, how it's rolling out. Is there problems that we can solve? And in the early days, there were concerns around exactly how it's being operationalized. We worked through those. There are specific communities across both of our countries for whom this has been more difficult than others. We've sought to address those issues to the greatest extent possible in a coordinated manner. So there's been an enormous amount of information sharing and coordination, and there continues to be. But coordination doesn't mean you're going to do exactly the same thing, right? And indeed, since the very beginning, we haven't been doing the same thing. The United States has allowed Canadians to fly to the United States since the very beginning of this pandemic, whereas Canada restricted land border transit as well as flights from the United States. So, again, coordination is about sharing information. It's about making sure where we can implement in a manner that is as smooth as possible. We're doing so, but we both are also committed to making decisions based on science and the advice of experts. And those are our experts, our science, our experts, our country, what is happening for us on the ground. And the US is doing the same. It's making decisions based on their situation on the ground. So that would, I'm sure the ambassador can speak for the US, but just to say, the collaboration and information sharing and the effort to problem solve together has been stellar under this administration, and I'll be, credit where credit is due since the outset of this pandemic.
Excellent. Please, Ambassador Chacon.
Christopher, I would echo exactly the comments that Ambassador Hillman made. She was quite eloquent, and I really have nothing to add other than, the consultation and the coordination is ongoing, so it will continue. And it is, of course, resulted in a major achievement of us actually keeping our border open to essential travel and trade and the like. So I think we're in a good place. We continue to review our travel restrictions, and any decisions about reopening travel is going to be guided by our public health and medical experts. We take this very, very seriously, but I think we're in a good place and the trajectory is very promising.
Oh, excellent. Thank you both for that. Ambassador Chacon, while I have you, the roadmap includes a leader's pledge to work together to build the necessary supply chains to make Canada and the US global leaders in all aspects of battery development and production. And they also agreed to strengthen the Canada-US Critical Minerals Action Plan to target net zero industrial transformation, batteries for zero emission vehicles, and renewable energy storage. Can you talk a little bit about the work being done there and why a Critical Minerals Action Plan with Canada in particular?
Sure. Thanks for the question. The Critical Minerals Working Group is comprised of a multitude of US and Canadian federal departments and agencies, and it's very active in laying the foundation for North America to be a prime source of materials and metals that we are going to need to power our transition to a net zero future. For example, the Department of Commerce at the embassy here in Ottawa, along with Natural Resources Canada, have an active program of industry outreach. that brings together Canadian and U.S. Minerals companies rather to identify the needs and develop solutions for critical minerals supply chain security. So, we want to continue this cooperation with the government of Canada, and we look forward to continued collaboration with the private sector to advance, the U.S. Canada Critical Minerals Action Plan in the roadmap.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ambassador Hillman, the roadmap also pledged the two countries to update an existing MOU on the reliability and security of North American energy infrastructure. Could you tell us a little bit about what the MOU includes and what updates are needed? Particularly, I'm thinking of the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline a few months ago. What are we working on there?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that the MOU dates back a few years, and there was a lot of focus on, there was not enough focus, if I can put it this way, on green technology, green investments, and efforts that we want to make with respect to new energy. Not that it's all that new, but enhancing that aspect of our energy relationship as well. So there's a focus there. There's a focus on, I think that in the energy transition, we also have to be very mindful that in any transition, there are people that are implicated in an industry that may be diminishing, that have jobs there. In other words, what we want to do is make sure that we're also focusing on the workers that are working in our energy sector to make sure that they are supported, and that we are, as we enhance all forms of energy, that we are creating good jobs for Canadians and for Americans. So there's some focus on the jobs aspect of our energy relationship as well. And there's focus on the ways in which we can work together. For example, for the United States to meet some of its climate goals, it's going to require much more electrification of its energy sector. And Canada has a lot to offer there. So we're really, we want to make sure that we are, back to my kind of opening philosophy, if I can put it that way, of this action plan, it's how can we be helping each other succeed and supporting each other in each other's success. So that's those are some of the updates there.
No, thank you very much. Ambassador Chacon, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau reiterated their commitment to multilateralism and building global alliances in the roadmap. Could you talk a little bit about how the Biden administration emphasis on multilateralism shapes the bilateral relationship or agenda between the U.S. and Canada? And I know you've had a lot of experience outside of Canada-U.S. Have you ever seen anything like this particular partnership on the world stage? Oh, I think you're on mute, sir. Sorry about that.
Okay.
There you are.
We certainly value this partnership, and the roadmap brings into sharp relief, our shared commitment to addressing global challenges, and President Biden has been so eloquent about saying this. And again, the using multilateral institutions effectively. So we agreed to cooperate and to expand this cooperation, because we certainly want to work together in promoting democracy, human rights, and media freedom in this hemisphere, certainly, but of course, around the world. I mentioned the Venezuela Donors Conference that Canada recently hosted that was very successful. I particularly see promising avenues for cooperation on Haiti, Nicaragua, Cuba, because this is our hemisphere, we know it well, and there's much that we can do together to advance our agenda in this regard.
Well, fantastic. Now, Ambassador Hillman, I want to ask you as a follow-up, because Ambassador Chacon mentioned the importance of cooperating on China. And it's striking in the roadmap that President Biden reiterated. It's one of the only things that is a sort of single leader statement, but he reiterated his call for China to release Canadian hostages, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. This is clearly an area where the U.S. and Canada are aligned, and it's a tough challenge, but what can the two countries do to better address our differences with China?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the first thing I'd like to say about Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are two Canadians who are being arbitrarily detained in China in retribution, frankly, for Canada having lived up to its legal commitments to the United States by under our extradition treaty with the United States. We are deeply grateful for the vocal and very specific support that we are getting from the U.S. administration from the very top, as you mentioned, all the way through. And this is something that I have had, you know, probably every week. I have an engagement with the administration and certainly members of Congress on this, and I just want to put that on the record how very much we appreciate that. For the broader relationship, I can say that actually, you know, we are very supportive of the pragmatic, if I can put it this way, approach to the China relationship. For us, Minister Garneau, our foreign minister, has said there are 4 C's when it comes to Canada dealing with China. We want to challenge them, you know, where we must on issues of values and human rights and democracy. We want to compete with them fairly and on a level playing field, because you know that's good for the world. If we're back to my comment around emerging technologies and an effort to green, for example, our transportation sector, we should all be competing with each other fairly and according to rules that you know are putting us on a level playing field, but in order to get the most out of human ingenuity. We need to cooperate because there are some global problems where it's completely impossible to be solved without China as one of the leading, you know, most populous, most powerful nations on the globe. Climate is an obvious example. Climate change and seeking resolution there. And then we coexist. That's our 4th C. And sometimes we just coexist. We do things the way we believe in. We demonstrate that we believe that the way in which we organize our society, the way in which we treat our people, the way in which we operate in the world is the best way. And that, you know, democracies can yield great success and great prosperity for people. And that is a question of our demonstrating our value proposition, if I can put it that way. So that's the Canadian approach. And it's very much aligned with President Biden's approach as well, and his efforts, I think, so far. But none of us can underestimate, you know, the challenges and the multifaceted nature of operating in so many different spheres with China. And so it's something we work on often with the U.S. government, but also with the Hill and many of our like-minded countries here in Washington and in different fora like the G7 and the G20 and otherwise.
Thank you very much for that. And ambassadors, we have come to the end of our time. I have to say, just as someone who's a super fan of Canada-US relations, and I really do enjoy all of this detail, I think the relationship is in very good hands, and the roadmap puts us on a very good road forward. And I'm so impressed by both of you and the way that you've covered a lot of ground today, but also very important ground. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of this public update, and maybe we'll have a chance to do this again soon with both of you. So thank you very much, and thanks to our viewers, and we'll look forward to having you all back virtually to the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thanks.